Hello, my name is John Crossman, and to tell you a little bit about myself, the first thing I'd like to tell you is that my dad was a pastor and civil rights leader. And the reason why that's important to know is it really helps sort of define and shape, what it is I'm all about. And I'll give you a couple of examples of how that comes to life today. The first is they've done studies on pastors' kids, lawyers' kids, and doctors' kids. And what they found is that pastors' kids typically outperform doctors' kids and lawyers' kids in life. And I have my own theory of why I think that is. And the reason why is I think that when you're a pastor's kid, you grow up in an educated household. My parents were readers, and they had big vision and really valued education. And so that was an important part of an aspect of mine growing up, really respecting the academic world. The second thing about being a preacher's kid is you grow up in a household that has vision and a real commitment to community. So when I was a kid and my parents were watching the evening news, if something was happening in the news, we as a family were then automatically involved, right? So historic moments when the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Cuban Missile Crisis was happening, which was before I was born, my parents were involved with, if something was going to happen, they always said they weren't going to be taking up arms. They were going to help with the wounded. But they were there, and they were part of that different process happening there. You move it into the civil rights movement. My parents were involved in protest and marching and going to Washington and marching locally and be involved in that. When I was coming up, I saw my dad stand up against the KKK. I mean, literally fighting against the KKK, fighting against the mob who were doing things in South Florida. So community involvement was a big deal. So education, community involvement. But here's the third one. We grew up poor, dude. We grew up poor. And I did not grow up in privileged neighborhoods. I grew up in really working class, struggling neighborhoods. And I will even say that there were certain places we lived where, looking out the window of my house, I watched domestic violence, and I watched some really rough, bad things go down. So for me, at a very young age, I became a devout capitalist. I really saw my parents doing so many good things on a shoestring budget. And I thought, I really want to go out and work hard and make money. I will tell you that I didn't know until my 40s that I'm actually dyslexic. So when I went to college, and I really always tried to work hard at school, I always had this shame of feeling like I was dumber than all the other kids because my friends seemed to make better grades easily, and it was hard for me. When I graduated from college, I graduated with a 2.9 GPA. Some people would say they graduated with a 2.9 GPA and they partied the entire time. I did not party at all in college. I never missed a class. I never missed a study hall. I never missed an opportunity to work with a tutor. It was literally the highest grade I could get. So after getting out of college, I really wanted to get into work into a job where I could work a lot of hours and make as much money as I could. And commercial real estate really was appealing for me in that way. And so very early on in my career, I worked really hard and had some success and got some promotions. And I'll never forget, I got a call from a professor at Florida State University who said, John, we've got this thing called If I Were 25, and we want to know if you would lead it for us because it helps young students and professionals. And so I told the professor I'd be delighted to do it, but we'd have to change the name to If I Were 24 or If I Were 21, because I was 24 at the time and actually didn't meet the criteria because I wasn't yet 25. So we did, and they changed it to If I Were 21, and now I'm 50, and I still lead that same presentation every single year, where I'm trying to help young people get out, work hard, and know how to build their careers and overcome obstacles along the way. As I became more successful in my career, a couple of significant things happened. One is that I really became more and more aware of the lack of diversity in my industry, in commercial real estate. And I always tell people that I really don't often meet anyone that I think is a racist. It's not like I meet people and hear them say something and think, gosh, this is a racist person, like the kind of things I heard when I was a kid. But what I do hear to this day is statements that are elitist. And I always feel like racism and elitism are roommates. And so I still see that. And then also along with that, working in commercial real estate, it's an example of institutional racism. And so even though a lot of the people are good people, the structures are still in place that need to get addressed. So having that, part of my life, getting exposure to that, realizing that with success, I had financial opportunity to help and make an impact and change some things. And so that's been a big part of my career, is making that impact. So for example, I endowed the first ever real estate scholarship at Florida A&M. the first ever real estate scholarship at Bethune-Cookman University, the first ever real estate scholarship at Valencia College for students of Hispanic descent, and now I have the first ever real estate scholarship endowed at Jackson State University in Jackson, Mississippi. All of those efforts are to help minority communities get more exposure in different topics that have limited their financial wealth creating success and making an impact there. The other thing I want to mention that's a big part of me and Crossman Career Builders is the topic of mental health. After having a very successful career and really having all kinds of success, I mentioned about my struggles in college. 20 years after graduating college, I got named to the Hall of Fame for the College of Business at Florida State University, the youngest person ever. And so for the guy that kind of had to struggle to get that 2.9, that was a big deal. In the same year that that happened, I had a lot of other success happening, and I'd really gotten back into running. I ran track in college. In fact, I was a sprinter when I ran track in college, and being a white sprinter, people used to always say that they thought maybe I was part black. And then Ancestry.com came along, and guess what? I am part black. We actually had always theorized that, but it turns out my mom's dad was half black, and so that's part of my story as well. But anyway, as I got into my 40s, I got back into running and doing distance running and did a marathon and did some different things. And one Sunday, after having a really full week of work, I ran a half marathon. And I ran the best time I'd ever run, probably ever will run. The problem was when I crossed the finish line, I really felt like something physically was wrong. And there was an ambulance there at the race, which I thought about walking over to, but then decided not to. Went to work the next day, went to work the day after that, and finally decided I better go to my doctor and just ask and see what's wrong. And when I went to see the doctor, I was being taken back to the room with the nurse, and I was just telling her what was going on, my symptoms, and she looked at me and she said, "Well, it sounds like you're suffering from depression." And I was so shocked that I was being told that, I was suffering from potentially clinical depression. When I got into the room and I met with a doctor, I again was diagnosed with suffering from clinical depression, and for the next year was on Zoloft for a year and Klonopin for a good part of that year. So, I talk about having success, and I can talk about giving back and working with historically black colleges and dealing with the topic of race, and then that can help you with significance. At the same time, I still went to hell and back having a mental health issue. And so I really enjoy, as part of what I do across Career Builders, is bringing attention to taking away the stigma from talking about mental health and helping people understand we can talk about these issues, we can share resources with one another, we can take away the shame from it. You can be very successful in about every way possible and still have a major mental health crisis. And when I went through that, and then I went through a recovery program, it really helped me enjoy my life much more. One last thing on all those topics is that during a lot of that season of working through all that, I've always been blessed to have the opportunity to mentor college students and young professionals. And during that season, I was mentoring a young man who truly is one of the most talented young professionals I've ever worked with. I mean, just an exceptional human being. And after him going through a bit of a rough time, and I was helping him through it, I worked with my nephew, who's a recruiter, and my nephew helped him get a new job. He lost his job, and he was having some marital troubles. And he was scheduled to start his new job on a Monday morning. And that Monday, my nephew called me and said, "Hey, Uncle John, your friend didn't show up to work today." And we ended up finding his body in downtown Orlando 24 hours later, and he had shot himself in the head. So what do you do when you're a successful person and you're mentoring somebody and the person you mentor kills themselves? How do you deal with suicide? How do you deal with loss of somebody that you love and you care for? So opening up that world and understanding that, and then really trying to help as much as we can with individuals, with companies, with communities, to learn how to have these hard and yet healthy conversations. Could be about race, could be about mental health, could be about suicide, could be about addiction. I will tell you that there's been times in my life where I thought, do we need to keep talking about these topics? And the reality is they're part of the human condition. And some things are so easy we can talk about, work on, and others are very ugly and difficult. But I want you to know there absolutely is hope, there are resources, and there are all kinds of people out there that want to help on these hard topics, and we can improve them. And so hopefully what I'm doing, what Crossman Career Builders is doing, is help provide those resources so people can experience healing in this lifetime, and so that then they can help out future generations. And that's one of the many things we do at Crossman Career Builders.